Welcome, everyone. Today's story is about an important life lesson: taking responsibility for your actions, choices, and future. Many people spend years blaming other people, bad luck, difficult situations, or the past for their problems. However, real growth begins when a person accepts responsibility for their life. This story will show you how taking responsibility can change your mindset, improve your confidence, and help you move forward even when life is difficult. The lesson you will learn is simple but powerful. When you stop blaming and start taking responsibility, you gain the power to change your life. There was once a young person who often felt frustrated with life. Every morning seemed to begin with a complaint. If something went wrong, there was always someone or something to blame. When work became difficult, the boss was blamed. When goals were not achieved, the circumstances were blamed. When opportunities were missed, bad luck was blamed. This habit had become so normal that it happened without thinking. At first, it felt comforting because blaming others removed the burden of responsibility. It was easier to say that life was unfair than to admit mistakes. It was easier to point at outside problems than to look inward. Yet despite all the complaints and excuses, nothing improved. The same disappointments appeared again and again. The same problems returned in different forms. Days turned into months, and months turned into years. Deep inside, there was a feeling that life should be better, but there was no clear understanding of why things remained the same. One day, after experiencing another disappointment, the young person sat alone and thought about everything that had happened over the years. It was impossible to ignore a simple pattern. Every time something went wrong, blame had been placed somewhere else. Family was blamed, friends were blamed, teachers were blamed, employers were blamed, the economy was blamed, luck was blamed. Yet after all that blaming, nothing had changed. The problems remained. The goals were still far away. The dreams were still waiting. A difficult question suddenly appeared in the mind. What if the problem is not everyone else? What if the problem is my refusal to take responsibility? The question felt uncomfortable because it challenged years of thinking, but it also felt strangely honest. For the first time, the young person decided to examine personal choices instead of searching for someone else to blame. Looking back, many mistakes became visible. There had been opportunities to learn new skills, but laziness had won. There had been chances to work harder, but distractions had taken over. There had been moments when courage was needed, but fear had controlled decisions. These realizations were painful. Nobody enjoys admitting mistakes. However, something surprising happened. Along with the discomfort came a feeling of freedom. If personal choices had helped create the problems, then personal choices could also help create solutions. Responsibility suddenly looked less like a burden and more like a source of power. The next morning, a new habit began. Instead of asking, "Who is responsible for my problems?" the young person asked, "What can I do to improve this situation?" The change seemed small, but it transformed the way challenges were viewed. Whenever a mistake happened, there was no search for excuses. Instead, there was a search for lessons. Whenever failure appeared, there was no blame. Instead, there was reflection and improvement. This approach did not make life easier overnight. Problems still existed. Difficult people still existed. Unfair situations still existed. But something important had changed. The young person was no longer powerless. Responsibility created a sense of control that blaming never could. As weeks passed, progress slowly appeared. Work performance improved because excuses were replaced with effort. Relationships became stronger because mistakes were admitted instead of defended. Confidence grew because promises were kept. The young person discovered that responsibility is closely connected to trust. People trust those who accept their mistakes and work to improve them. They respect those who do not hide behind excuses. They admire those who remain accountable even when circumstances are difficult. Every small act of responsibility added another brick to the foundation of self-respect. One afternoon, a challenge tested this new mindset. A project failed despite many hours of work. The old habit immediately tried to return. It would have been easy to blame coworkers, bad timing, or limited resources. For a moment, the temptation was strong. But then the young person paused and remembered the lesson being learned. Instead of blaming others, the situation was carefully reviewed. Several areas for improvement were discovered. Better planning could have been used. Communication could have been clearer. More preparation could have been done earlier. These lessons became valuable tools for future success. A failure that might once have produced anger and excuses instead produced growth and wisdom. Months later, another realization appeared. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything. Many people misunderstand this idea. Taking responsibility does not mean carrying guilt for events beyond your control. It does not mean accepting blame for every problem in the world. Responsibility means focusing on what you can control, rather than wasting energy on what you cannot. Weather cannot be controlled. Other people's actions cannot be controlled. Unexpected events cannot be controlled. But attitude, effort, decisions, and responses can be controlled. This understanding brought peace because it created a healthy balance. There was no need to carry unnecessary guilt, but there was also no need to avoid accountability. As time continued, life gradually changed. Opportunities began to appear more often. The reason was not luck. The reason was preparation. When responsibility became a habit, learning became a habit too. Skills improved, knowledge expanded, confidence increased. Challenges that once seemed impossible now looked manageable. The young person realized that success is often built on responsibility. People who achieve great things rarely spend their lives making excuses. They focus on solutions. They accept mistakes. They learn from failure. They keep moving forward. One evening, while watching others complain about their situations, the young person recognized a familiar pattern. Some blamed the government. Some blamed their families. Some blamed their past. Some blamed their lack of opportunities. While a few of their complaints were understandable, there was one common problem. None of the blame was creating change. The more they focused on external reasons, the less power they felt. It was like giving away control of their lives. Seeing this pattern from the outside made the lesson even clearer. Responsibility is not about punishment. It is about empowerment. The moment you accept responsibility, you stop waiting for someone else to save you. Years later, the young person had grown into a confident and respected individual. Life was still imperfect. There were still setbacks and difficult days. However, the difference was enormous. Challenges were no longer viewed as proof of failure. They were viewed as opportunities to learn and adapt. Mistakes were no longer hidden. They were acknowledged and corrected. Goals were no longer left to chance. They were pursued with discipline and commitment. Most importantly, happiness no longer depended entirely on outside circumstances. It came from knowing that personal choices were aligned with personal values. Looking back, the greatest transformation had not been financial success, career growth, or recognition from others. The greatest transformation had been the shift from blame to responsibility. That single change affected every area of life. It improved relationships, strengthened confidence, increased resilience, and created a sense of purpose. The young person finally understood a truth that many people spend years trying to learn. Responsibility is not something that limits freedom. Responsibility creates freedom. When you take ownership of your actions, you gain the ability to shape your future. The lesson of this story is simple but life-changing. Every person faces challenges. Every person experiences setbacks. Not everything that happens to us is our fault. However, our response is always our responsibility. Blaming others may feel comfortable for a moment, but it keeps us stuck. Taking responsibility may feel difficult at first, but it helps us grow stronger. The moment you stop asking, "Who can I blame?" and start asking, "What can I do?" your life begins to change. Responsibility gives you power, direction, and confidence. It turns obstacles into lessons and failures into opportunities.